Hello and good evening. I was actually told to stay sitting down, but just for the first minute of introduction, I thought I'd stand up and say, welcome to Orpington Literary Festival. I am Tessa Dunlop and have the great privilege this evening of interviewing a genuine British hero into the Orpington fold. You know, Simon, I was thinking on the way here, in our divided times, culture wars, wokery, whatever you want to call it, each pitted against the other, there are very few people who can unanimously elicit a positive response. But surely you, former Welsh Guard, entrepreneur, businessman, Simon Weston OBE, are one of them. CBE, oh God, I made my first mistake. I promise you this is alcohol free, okay? I promise you.
I got promoted, so.
Yeah, well, it should be an OBE. Why aren't you sir? We'll have to sort that out. I'm going to sit back down now and finish the second part of my introduction. I'm actually perched slightly higher than you, which I feel is a little inappropriate. But anyway, for my generation, I was a child in the 1980s, and your story, which I think so many of us vicariously followed, personalised war in a way that the loss of friends and colleagues, extensive physical disfigurement, things we thought had been consigned to history after 2 world wars, and you lived them, you survived them, and you've become this symbol of hope. I wonder if 40 plus years on, it's ever a little bit tiring being everyone's symbol of hope.
I don't think I ever thought about it that way. Being a symbol of hope. I've been a symbol of many other things on a Friday and Saturday night. Perhaps it was people hoping I would go home, I don't know. It's odd. I mean, I think the one thing about history is, somebody very wise once said it, that we're destined to repeat it. And the damage that was done to people in the Second World War and the First World War, and we saw sort of the Guinea Pig Club and Mackindale and Sir Harold Gillies in the First World War and all the plastics reconstructive surgery, those guys pioneered. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have survived. But that's medicine and science anyway. For somebody to survive today, somebody had to suffer yesterday. So, you know, we shouldn't be surprised at those types of things. But I am very fortunate, you know. People could look at my life in so many different ways and say, oh, well, and this is not me saying I was the worst injured to come back from the Falklands, this was the doctors and surgeons. Even though people had more, what would be perceived as much more traumatic injuries. But
what did they base that idea on, being the most injured? Was it because you required the most surgery? Because I think you had 96 operations or something.
Yeah, and between 500 and 700 units of blood and blood products. That wasn't told to me by the hospital, by the way. That was told to me by the Welsh Blood Service. Unsolicited. Unsolicited, they told me how many units of blood I'd had, and I didn't ask them. I really didn't, and I didn't particularly want to know. But the reason I had so many operations was because of infections. It was before they really did pay attention to infections and the damage infections could do. But no, I mean, going back to it and looking at it in its entirety, I was just fortunate, and I don't know why I was the worst injured or why they perceived me to be the worst injured, but I was the one injured person they didn't want to send home because they wanted to bring me back on the hospital ship because they didn't think I would survive the journey. And they weren't far off because they took me from the hospital ship. Now, understanding that I went from an 18.5 stone fighting fit infantry soldier and prop forward, I won't talk about rugby, by the way, because, well, most of you are English, what the hell do you know about it? Not that I'm confrontational, argumentative, even though we're crap at the moment, but yeah, they put me on board a logistics ship which was bringing me back from the Falklands, from the hospital ship, and I'd lost, so I went down to just under 8 stone, and then they put me on this little oceanographic ship which maps the bottom of the seas, and they had to resuscitate me twice on there because my heart just went sod it. It didn't sort of go bang and the muscle get damaged, it just went sod it.
Just withered.
No, it just stopped. It just stopped. I suppose it was exhausted. You know, it's a bit like running for a bus and you get halfway, you go, oh, sod it, I'll wait for the next one. And he did a bit of that, I think, and then they cleaned my wounds with a brush. And that was painful enough, but I didn't care because they gave me 100 milligrams of pethidine, and it didn't stop me feeling the pain, I just didn't give a sod. But anyway, they got me up to Montevideo. But that's why the surgeons said, you know, they weren't sure. But I nearly didn't make it home anyway because of the RAF. Because the aircraft we got onto in Montevideo was hurtling down the runway, it's getting to the point of no return. And the nose is about to lift off the runway, and the engine exploded and fell on the runway. So just call me lucky, okay?
Your parents were in the RAF, that's how they met, isn't it?
Yeah, so I blame the RAF for everything.
I can see that. There's a bit of a sort of Oedipus thing going on there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's definitely their fault. If they hadn't have met, I wouldn't have been born, I would never have got injured. It's their fault.
Yeah, and your mum encouraged you to sign up, didn't she?
Yeah, by the scruff of my neck.
Because you were a bad boy.
Because I was in trouble, yeah. I was making poor choices. I blame nobody for the situations I found myself in. I was the one who made poor choices. I was 14 years of age. I was old enough to know better. And I got caught in a stolen car. If they'd have caught me quicker, they'd have caught me in more. But they never caught me driving them, or actually stealing them in the sense of driving them away, primarily because I couldn't drive at the time. But I was very good with the manicuring scissors, and I could open most cars and start them with the manicuring scissors. But anyway, enough of my nefarious past.
So you're 16 and your mum's like, get into the army.
15.
15,
Yeah.
Right, okay. And retrospectively, given, I mean, I've been reading several of your books, brilliant by the way. I'm going to read out an extract just to put people off their dinner in a bit. But after your extensive injuries, there you're on RAF lineman, I think, in Wiltshire, is it? And your mum goes, oh, that poor wee fellow. She doesn't actually recognise you, does she?
No, well, they've been waiting, it's get on the bus, get off the bus. If you're in the military, you know what that is. It's stand up, sit down, waiting for me to arrive. And when the aircraft blew up and everything else, so they were desperate for me to arrive home. They knew I was badly injured, but they didn't know just how badly. But my mother and my grandmother were standing in the corridor when they wheeled my gurney in, and my mother said to my grandmother, she said, oh ma'am, she said, look at this poor boy. And that's when I cried out to her. I said, hey ma'am, it's me, it's okay, at least I'm alive. And that was when her legs just buckled under her, and they had to take her away. And once they calmed her down, and that's when our journey started together.
Because she was an absolute rock. But I wonder how, just as a mother, how she kind of reconciled what had happened. There she was, encouraging you into the army. Because a lot of mums feel a bit heartbroken when their sons go into the army, or their daughters.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, I've never thought of it that way, and I've spoken to her about it, and I've said, look, don't think about it that way. I had the best years I could possibly have had without being injured when I was in the Welsh Guards. I loved being a soldier. And most soldiers love being soldiers. The one thing you don't like is being cold and wet.
Yeah.
You know, we will be honest about that. But at the end of the day, you're with some of the funniest people, some of the toughest people. You're with some of the most unbelievably compassionate, intelligent, thick. Oh my God, thick isn't in it. You know what I mean? In every section, there is somebody. They're the idiot that one village is missing somewhere. Honest to God. And you've got to be in the military to really understand how stupid people can be. Because it's like, you say to them, you say, what colour is the sky in your world? You know, because they are so unbelievably different thinking. But oh yeah, I loved it. So I've never ever thought of it that way.
And you did 4 years. You served in Northern Ireland, you served in Kenya, before you're dispatched. So where you go from Kenya to the Falklands, don't you? It's 1982. You leave, I think you leave from Southampton. Give us the vibe there, because it was a big send-off. There was a lot of press, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Around this war that was being fought.
I slept all the way from the barracks to the ship. I wasn't interested at all in all the sort of pomp and ceremony.
But there was a bit of flag waving, wasn't there?
Oh, there was a lot of jingoism, yeah, without a doubt, you know.
So it was wasted on you.
Yeah, pretty much. I remember being there, and I climbed up on the deck, and I was sitting on one of the arms that they use the lifeboats off on the Kiwi2, and I was sitting on one of them, which is unusual for me because I'm terrified of heights. Anyway, I'm looking across and I see my grandfather, and he's smoking away because he started smoking the second I went to war, and he didn't stop until he was sure I was going to survive. And my mother and my stepfather were there, and my grandmother couldn't bring herself to be there. But to be honest with you, more importantly than them being there, there was a very generous young lady who decided to take a vest off, and none of the boys were looking at anything else. They were looking at this robed lady. Yeah, she was a fine young lady. I think she could have breastfed a big county. But yeah, look, it's true. It's what happened, you know. And the boys were writing all these cardboard placards. Thanks for the cruise, Maggie. Thanks for the holiday. And as far as we were concerned, that's what we thought we would go to, because we thought that the Marines and Paras would have sorted it all out by the time we got there. And we'd be garrisoning the place, and we would be picking up the empty brass casings from the fight. But it was only when we were on the way down that we realised it was going to be real. Mind you, they put the guards and the Gurkhas and the field artillery and ambulance crews and all that on the Kiwi2. And we were on the finest blue ribbon ship that Britain had to offer. She sailed out into the English Channel and promptly broke down. British engineering, the best. Yeah. So, you know, but we sailed down via Northwest Africa. Yeah. And once we got past Freetown, that's when we went tactical. That's when we covered up all the portals, and we had different radio signals and tactics, and everything changed.
But just before the attack, you write in your book, you hadn't practiced or drilled for an air raid, which I was a bit surprised by.
Yeah, well, we got to talk to the Navy and the Marines about that one, because we were infantry. We knew our job, but they didn't help us understand their job, which, you know, looking back on it, would have been helpful. And then certainly, when we got on the Sagala, they'd taken all the schematics down, all the internal maps, which tell you where everything is and where to go.
Why?
So, if it got overrun by, say, Argentinian Marines or Special Forces of any sort, they wouldn't know where to go. So they wouldn't know what was going on. And it would have helped, because when it did get blown up, there was a guy called Curly Jones. Now, Curly was bald from the age of 10, and he was 6'4", prison officer now. But anyway, Curly, the bomb had hit, and his section was stuck on a walkway, and they didn't know which way to go, and they had no schematics to look at, and the water started filling in the walkway, and they didn't know what's going on. You know, they didn't know whether we were sinking or whatever. And all the boys were looking at Curly, going, "What do we do, Curly?" And he was only a guardsman. He wasn't even an NCO, but he was a really good soldier. And they're all looking to him for guidance. And he said, "Let's go this way." So they went that way, and then all of a sudden things started blowing up and coming up this stairwell, and there's sparks and scary stuff happening and stuff whizzing around, shrapnel or whatever. So he said, "Well, we'll go this way." So they went that way, and then something else erupted down there. And all of a sudden this vision came out of a doorway, and it was, there was a guy with his hair covered in soap suds. He had a pink towel on, pink flip-flops, carrying a pink wash bag, and he was covered in soap suds. And this guy said, "Are we lost, boys?" And they looked at him and he went, "Come on, follow me." And he led him out, and the Curly said, I mean, he's never looked at men in pink ever the same again. But it was mighty funny story the way Curly tells it.
And this is all, this kind of parallel universes going on your vessel, isn't there, when the bomb goes off?
Yeah, absolutely. You can only exist in the world that you exist in.
Yeah.
When things like that, the thing is, people talk about wars and they say, "Oh, you were only involved in a small war." If I canvassed anybody that was involved in a war, in any type of major conflict, even if it was over 1,000 miles, your war exists 100 yards that way, 100 yards that way, and everything to your front. You can't affect what's happening 100 miles away or even a mile away. That is out of your purview. You do not have that choice. So you've just got to accept that your world exists where it is. And that's your war. And I can assure you, the war that you're in is the biggest war you've ever been in. Because you're still fighting for your life and for your friends' lives and fighting to achieve the objective. So I get really annoyed at people who make silly crass statements about the size and scale and everything else. War exists where you are. And you have to be in the here and now, here, right now. Because if you're not going to be paying attention, and somebody else could suffer. If it's not you, it will be somebody else. And then you've got to live with that knowledge that you didn't do your job. And, so that's the scale of it all. So you do exist in your own little parallel universe and on board a ship, without a doubt. Because I couldn't see what was going on for Curly.
You call it, when the bomb lands, your own personal Hiroshima. And of course it was made much worse because of what your vessel was carrying, wasn't it? A lot of diesel, a lot of petrol.
Yeah, a lot of ammunition. I was in the mortar platoon, and we had hundreds, if not thousands of rounds of ammunition on board. Each person carries 2 rounds in the infantry, and then they drop them at a certain point so that the mortars can get them. But because the mortars couldn't carry it all. And they all carry they carry 2 or 4 rounds per person, as well as their big heavy kit. And you hope that you've got helicopters and vehicles to take the heavy weight forward for you, which is what happened for the Marines and the Paras a lot of the time. They had their heavy kit taken forward for them. But we didn't have anything because the Atlantic Conveyor had been bombed, and that meant that we were supposed to walk, but all they found for us was a tractor and a trailer, and the trailer kept bogging down with all the weight of the mortar equipment and the anti-tank platoon equipment, so, the Milans and everything. So it just went wrong from there.
I'm not going to read out the worst bit, because I feel it's just too intense. It's something that I think people need to read on their own, really. But I'm just going to read a little extract from when the jet's gone overhead, and there's this kind of, it's almost like slow motion. The flash was yellow and orange, like an oil rig flare. A moment later, there was the warmth of summer in the air, only there was no breeze, nothing moved at all. Nobody did anything, nobody said anything. A cloud bellied outwards and upwards, and we just watched it engulf us. It was all so quiet. The lad next to me was standing as still and as rigid as a statue. Suddenly everybody sprang back to life, but now men were shadows, silhouettes, with brilliant whole-body halos of the most beautiful colours I'd ever seen. A sunburst that I could touch and yet couldn't touch. It was touching me, I couldn't touch it back. I felt the air sucked into my lungs, and then a surge of hot air washed over me. No sensation yet of the cruel, excruciating, unrelenting heat. In that first blinding flash, all my exposed nerve endings had been scorched away. It was like you were frozen in time just in that moment. It feels like, but to read it.
Well, the fact of life is that on reflection, you've got time to think about it. At the time, it goes on for ages. The reality is it was split seconds. Yeah. But it's amazing what the mind can take a snapshot of. It's amazing what the mind can capture.
And the horror that you saw. Men were mutilated and burning and fought to rip off their clothing and douse the flames. I mean, they rushed around in circles screaming like pigs. This kind of stuff that, how do you ever, because people talk about PSD, and I don't think most of us who've never seen a battlefront in our lives except watching the news at night and poor old Ukraine, I don't think we can begin to understand what PSD means.
PTSD,
PTSD, thank you.
It can affect anybody, right? You don't have to be in a military scenario or in a police or a fire service. It can affect anybody. A car crash can do it to you. Assault can do it. You've seen somebody assaulted. Because mostly PTSD is about losing control of a situation, and the situation really just having such an impact on you for the rest of your days. But PTSD is eminently curable. It can be solved, it can be helped, and there are plenty of really good people out there that can do that for you. But the one thing about the incident that I was involved in, God forbid anybody else ever has to experience it. The truth is...
22 of your 30-strong platoon died, don't they?
Yeah. Yeah.
So 1 minute you're on deck, mucking around, and the next minute more than 2/3 of you are dead.
Yep.
And you're running like a banshee with your body melting.
Yeah. Look, we lost 32 or 34 Welsh Guardsmen. The 48 that died, most of them were attached to the Welsh Guards. So as far as we were concerned, they were Welsh Guardsmen. Most regiments are the same. If people are attached to you, you adopt them. You don't just say, oh, well, they were those, they were signals, they were scaly backs. We don't do that. You know, they're in with you, they're in with you. And so we lost a lot of good people that day. And as it turns out, unnecessarily. But that's another story that'll unravel over the next day or two. But, you know, the fact of the matter is that we didn't know what had fully happened. We didn't know whether it was a 500-pound bomb or it was napalm, because it had gone into the engine room and it had blown all the fuel out over us, which then coated us with diesel, which obviously burned, and the fireball didn't help, and then the 500-pound bomb detonated in that heat.
How long is it? How long is it? So this is 1982. At which point are you glad you're alive? What is you talk about wishing you had a gun in that moment, so a lot of men were just wanting to kill themselves and they didn't have hands to shoot themselves.
I couldn't find my gun.
Yeah.
Which is not unusual for me. I lost it many times drunk. No, I mean, look, it was just a reaction. It was, God, we're all bathed in the napalm gel. That's what we thought, because we've been told they had napalm. And it's amazing what sticks in your mind as to what people can do and what they've got. The fact that napalm was out at Goose Green and never got used, and it was not suitable, it couldn't be taken and fired anyway and dropped, because the bombs were all leaking. They were very poorly maintained. So we were very fortunate, I suppose. But the thing about the incident is that when you realise there's nothing you can do about the rest of it, you have to do the best about yourself. And all I knew was that I had to get out of there. And I felt a small waft of air. Now, whether I did or I didn't, for a split second, that's what I believe to this day. And I ran through the smoke in the correct direction. And I ran out and there was bodies lying all over the floor. And I didn't know whether they were alive or dead, but I didn't care. So I just ran over them. And people did cast aspersions on my parentage and my mother's fidelity. So people could use very profound language at the time. But that was just the way it was. And I got to the thing, a guy called Jimmy Salmon caught hold of me, he recognised me and he caught hold of me. Now Jimmy and I, we joined the same training platoon together and we went through the army together. And Jimmy helped save my life. And Jimmy got me to the top of the ship and Jimmy administered pethidine to me, which worked in a small degree, but it didn't work fully because my body was leaching fluid. But then they sat me down with a load of other guys and we were sat in this long line, and you know, then they decided to strip me off, so they cut my...
Take your clothes off?
Yeah.
Which have burnt onto you, presumably?
Well, they were cotton, so it doesn't stick.
Right.
So cotton clothing is ideal. Anything with nylon in, you know, I've seen one or two fellas in here wearing a bit of spandex. Don't get caught on fire, boys. You know, there is... With cotton, which is what it was designed, they did that a lot for Northern Ireland because the IRA were throwing sweetie jar bombs, and what they were filled with petrol and rubber bands, and the rubber would melt in the petrol, and then they would stick a wick on it, and then they would throw it, and instantly, obviously, when the glass broke, the petrol would ignite, and the rubber would be all over you, and you couldn't get it off. So they realised that it was sticking to things called, we used to have lightweights, like denim lightweights, and but they had nylon in them. And what we found out quite quickly was that those were adhering to the body So we stuck with the cotton, and you could cut that off. But you had to be careful, but because if you blistered, when you pulled the trousers off, you'd be taking the blister off with it.
So are you given training for that? You say that other men were looking after you, but are you all given pretty comprehensive medical training then? So you could have done the equivalent for somebody as injured?
I could have done the equivalent, yeah, I'd have been just as bad as they were.
Right.
Yeah, you mean, when I say that we were taught how to do things, we were taught the very rudiment parts of it. We were not doctors. I mean, I was a B2 medic, but I was not a doctor. I wasn't a trained medic in the sense of the field ambulance crews who were brilliant. Those guys and girls are unbelievably good.
And how quickly before you see somebody like that, how quickly between being burned and finding someone who knows what they're doing?
Well, when they eventually got me off on the helicopter and they took me to Fitzroy, there was at least half a dozen, 10 guys in there. So they brought me in and they shoved me on top of a pool table. And I remember Bev Bevan and Di Shaw, a couple of the guys that I knew really well, I used to go drinking with, played rugby with. Then I just remember then that they just knocked me out because I was going into shock. And I was unsettling everybody. So, you know, when you go into shock, you start making noises that you wouldn't make normally. And that was unsettling people. So they knocked me out. And the next time I woke up, I was in a field ambulance hospital called the Red and Green Life Machine, which was an old meat freezer packer centre. It was set up by a Navy guy called Rick Jolly. And as an administrator, he was a great guy. But then, you know, by that point in time, I was completely blind. So my eyes had suffered, and my eyes had shut down because the swelling and everything else. So yeah, I mean, I was in a pretty rotten state.
I wonder, we were talking before we started this interview about the Falklands being really the last uncontested war, a war that generally had the support of the public, that was seen as politically popular, unlike Afghanistan and Iraq. Do you think, did it make any difference to your emotional response to A, the loss of so many fellow servicemen and women, and B, your extensive injuries, knowing that it was a war that was supported?
When I got injured, I didn't know. I mean, we knew there was...
slightly further
retrospectively, but when I got back to hospital, I was fully not prepared for the British response, how positive. And I was in Woolwich, which is not a million miles from here, and I had people come up to see me from Bromley and from Black, what's it called? Yeah, there. And they used to come up to the hospital and see me. And one lady particularly used to come and see me, and they were fantastic. I cannot thank the people of this region enough for the way that they used to come to the hospital and the things that people did and fundraised, and you know, things that didn't happen for Iraq, Afghanistan, because there was a lot of conflict in people's minds. But as you say, the Falklands was universally popular with most people, in the sense that these were British people. They wanted to be British, they wanted to be under British sovereignty, they wanted to have our laws, they wanted to have our flag, and that was it. But they were being denied it. It's nothing more than subjugation. And had we done nothing, this country would have been nothing. We would have never been able to carry any type of gravitas again in the world. We would have been lost. And whether you like Baroness Thatcher or not, she was a woman for her time. And, you know, and I know a lot of people didn't like her, but, you know, there's a lot of men didn't like her because she was stronger than they were. Mentally, she was tougher. If she asked you a question, if you didn't know the answer, she would. And she'd want to know why you didn't know the answer, and then she would send you away to go and find out the answer. She was a woman for her time. For a wartime leader, she was probably the best we had. I mean, I can't remember a man back then being stronger, being more decisive, being more eloquent in the way they spoke about things than her. Look, she lost the plot afterwards. Some of the things she did, I don't agree with. But for that moment, she was the best we had. And the reality is that she cannibalised the whole British military. She got everything she could get from every other part of the British forces in Germany, in Ireland, everywhere. If only other people had known, if the terrorists had known that she'd done that, they may have probably made a bigger push at different things. But they didn't know how much she'd taken off all the units. And it all went down there. An awful lot of it got lost on the Atlantic conveyor. And that's why we've changed completely now our logistics and our resupply to service people in the front line. Because of the Falklands, because they put all their eggs in one basket. And it nearly killed us. It nearly failed. So, you know, there's a lot of it. But the people of this country, see, I fought tooth and nail when I got back. There was a big parade going up the Mall. All these veterans going up the Mall, all these serving soldiers going up the Mall, and they wouldn't let me. I wanted to go up there. I said, look, okay, I may not be well enough. I don't care. Take my bed and push my bed up the Mall. I wanted to enjoy it with everybody else. I did not want to be in a hospital watching it on television. But there was nothing I could do. They point blank refused me. So I was stuffed.
When was that? I've just discovered my microphone hasn't been working. So if you can't hear me at the back, don't worry, because I'm not the starter. Is that better? Oh, goodness. There I was, with Gay Abandon booming into it. Why didn't they want you to parade?
Because I was too ill.
Right. And when was this?
I don't know, it was a month or so after we got back, 2 months. But I was too ill. They were expecting me to die any time the journey home. They were expecting me to die any time for 3 or 4 months when I got back. You know, I didn't put an ounce of weight on. I was losing weight. And
why didn't you die?
It didn't seem like a good idea, if I'm honest. No, I mean, let's be honest about it. I'm just bloody rough as tough as anything. No, just call me Sergeant Rock. No, I don't know. Maybe it's because I was so bulky. That's another word for fat. Maybe it's because I was so bulky. I had weight to lose. Maybe it's because
so you were built like a brick shit house, if I may say so, weren't you?
Yeah, well, I'm about 17 and a half stone now.
Yeah. Are you?
Yeah. I'm just, yeah, I know, I lift weights.
You dress well.
I lift weights a lot. I'm only a stone lighter than I was when I was in the army.
Right.
So, but it was a much different shape because I was much younger, but I was much fitter. But the fact of the matter was that I was fit, and it just goes to show that if you listen to everybody, they say you've got a better chance to survive if you're fitter and if you're stronger. And the way I look at it at 62, I was piling the weight on 5-6 years ago, and I decided that I was going to get fit again. And my whole thought process goes back to when I got injured. If I wanted to survive, I had to give the doctors and nurses the best chance to help me. If I need them to help me, then there's no point in me being sort of 25 stone. I'm never going to survive. So
can we go back to that post? Because I can see the adrenaline, the initial shock, the fact you're alive, you come back, there's a hero's return, but then there's a really dark patch, isn't there?
Yeah, there always is. You know, you can't be euphoric forever. And this is something I try to avoid now. I try to have this flat line of normality.
Yeah, but you're in Orpington tonight, so you're going to be peaking.
Oh yeah, well, absolutely. You know, but the problem is it'll be really, really depressing. You know, the adrenaline pump will drop way below the line of normality when I get back into the Premier Inn. I know how to live me rock and roll. But no, you mean it's like so many of these things, isn't it? You know, you can only live the life you've got. I don't know why I survived. I know I was too scared to die because my grandmother swore she would commit suicide, come over the other side and give me a bloody good hammering. She told me that. Mind you, this is absolutely true. There was a guy, there used to be a nightclub across the road from my grandmother's house. It used to be an old cinema. And there was a guy there called Tiny. He was 6'10", weighed 32 stone. And my grandmother knocked him clean out cold, right? It was the old stone steps outside the terraced houses. And she leapt off the top step when he grabbed hold of my auntie. And she let him have it, and she caught him perfect. The timing was spot on. And anybody can knock anybody out if the timing's right. He drowned in a place called Langorse Lake, and the part he drowned in was only 6 foot. He was 6'10", and to this day I swear it's because my granny wouldn't take her foot off his head. Honest to God. So when she said she would have killed me if I'd have died, which I know is a bit of an oxymoron, but so yeah, I mean, there's an awful lot of that in there, you know. There's an awful lot of tough spirit in my family, and certainly in the women in my family. My grandfather was a prisoner of war, and he suffered terribly at the hands of the enemy, and he came back and he'd had a terrible stroke, and my grandmother used to go up and turn him over in the bed every 15 minutes, and she'd flip him like a pancake. And he said after about 2 months of that, he said, "Oh, sod this," he said, "she's worried me back to health." She bothered the holy crap out of him, so he just got out of bed and started walking. He said, "I can't cope with it anymore." And that's my grandmother, you know. And my mother, she was only my mother was her henchwoman, you know.
She's a tough woman, isn't she, Pauline? When you read about her, she really springs off the page.
Yeah, she is very tough. She's unbelievably gentle and unbelievably compassionate, but she's ferocious, you know, but as mothers can be.
What about you? You're a young guy, Simon, and you're in your 20s, and your family will always love you, but you look very different from the way you looked before you left to fight in the Falklands War. How do you manage that? How do you process that? I mean, it would murder the Instagram generation. Do you know what I mean? Where would they go from there? How do you get yourself from ground zero back up, dating, married?
The first thing you got to do is like who you are. If you like who you are, it doesn't matter what other people say. It doesn't matter what people think. And whether people like me or dislike me is none of my business, in truth. You know, I appreciate people if they do like me, that's great. But if they don't like me, keep it to yourself, you know, I'm not interested. I really don't care why people might not like me. I mean, it just doesn't bother me. Because I couldn't give a shiny shite. I swear to God, right? And if people don't like me, they can kiss my nose. And the reason I say that is because the skin of my nose comes off my ass. And it genuinely does. Smooth as a baby's bottom, I can tell you. No hairs on that bugger.
Didn't you tell that joke to Prince Philip?
I did. I told that to Prince Philip. It's not a joke, it's true.
Okay, I mean, yeah, I know, but
I said to him, I said, "Listen, sir, I won't go into the full story if you haven't got time." But I said to him, "Sir, I said, see, my life is very similar to yours." He said, "Well, how do you mean?" I said, "Well, think about it." I said, "Wherever you go, the world smells of new paint." Yeah. I said, "I have exactly the same problem because the skin of my nose comes off my ass." Well, he thought that was brilliant because he got the joke straight away because he was that type of guy. He was that type of guy. I remember doing a race for a disabled thing, and it was up in Donington, up in Derbyshire. And I was standing there thinking, he's going to stop and talk. He always stops and talks to me. And he walked straight past. I was mortified. I thought, anyway, I thought you saw. Anyway, he stopped then about 10 yards away and he walked back like that. He went, poked me in the belly, he went, "God, you've got fat, Weston." I would have been annoyed if it wasn't true.
You know, he was famous, Prince Philip, for having the same waist size when he was 19 as when he was 90.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's be honest, he was one of a kind. They broke the mold when they made that guy. He was tough.
Yeah.
He was uncompromising on himself and he was uncompromising on others. But he did have a great deal of compassion. It's just, he was one of those guys who was awkward when he came out.
Yeah, but we like that.
Yeah.
In the end, retrospectively, I think we miss it. I wonder about you as a celebrity. Because it probably wasn't what you imagined when you're just minding your own business in the Welsh Guards. But in fact, I can't be the only person that remembers back in the day when there was only 4 channels on the telly, and at least 1 or 2 had your mug on it, sometimes. You were a household name. How do you process that? And you're a different name and face than the one you got used to growing up.
Yeah, well, it's weird, isn't it? You know, if I wasn't on your telly back in the early 80s, you mean your telly was broke. You know, that's fair. But I never wanted to be famous. I had no desire to be in the public eye. There's lots of people today who want to be in the public eye and they have no idea why. You look at the TikTok generation and all these Facetune, what's it called it, wits what app and all them stupid things. And they all want to be famous. And I tell you what's great is when you see these ones and you always see the girls. They're always blowing some trout pout at this camera. That's going to do it. That's going to separate you from everybody else and make you famous. People are really going to want to know you for that one. I didn't want to be famous, and I am the most reluctant celebrity you've ever met in your life. I like nothing more than a quiet life. I'm quite shy. I'm just very confident.
So why? There's a bit of a contradiction there, though, isn't there? Was it part of your recovery, the sharing? Was that part of you coming to terms with a new reality?
No, it's because they started filming the Red and Green Life Machine to tell the story of that. And they then really got invested in me as the worst injured.
Did that annoy any of the other, like, properly badly injured but not quite injured enough injured?
You know, I don't know and I don't care.
Right.
You know, I can't be responsible for what they feel and what they don't feel. And sometimes you've got to do things and make decisions yourself. Yeah. And sometimes we make right ones and sometimes we make wrong ones, but you've got to make a decision. How
many of them do you stay in contact with from your platoon and from that lot that were in the Welsh Guards?
Quite a lot.
You do?
And there's not many of my platoon left in the mortars. But Mark Pemberton, he was my corporal, still very friendly with him. Jimmy Salmon, who helped save my life, still in touch with him. Big Mikey Amanis, still in touch with him, you know, on a regular basis, my officers.
And then you end up going back to the Falklands. It's quite well known this, I'm sure most of you, because we're fans here tonight, Simon. We're not just anyone pulled off the street, we're invested in your narrative. Most people will know that you went back and you met Carlos, the pilot, who drops the bomb. And not everyone, not all the ex-servicemen and women or their families were supportive of that idea. Can you explain why not?
Well, they had lost somebody. Right. You know, some of the boys weren't happy because it was like when Mike Green, he lost his brother Paul. So I get it. They'd suffered loss in the way that affected them. But I'd suffered the loss of me. I'd suffered my own personal bereavement. And I needed help. And there was nothing coming forward from the MOD or from the military medical services to help me with my PTSD and my depression and my suicidal tendency and my drinking and everything else. There was nothing. All they could think of was giving medication. And I had the opportunity to go and meet Carlos. I'd always expressed an interest to go and see him. And I just wanted to see if he had life in his eyes, because my constant nightmare, 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and my wife can testify to this, and I'd be rolling around the bedroom on fire. And there was this black jet that screamed overhead, and there was this hooded figure with flaming red demonic eyes, and he was bombing the ship.
Like a sort of Darth Vader character?
Yeah, something similar, yeah. But you know, you get the feeling just a blob, this homogeneous blob really, with just these flaming demonic red eyes. And this was flying over me every night. And I was getting burned every night. And I had the chance to go and meet Carlos, and he was told of my nightmares and my problems, and they said to him, would you meet him? And Carlos, in a heartbeat, said, yes, of course I'll meet him. And then he qualified it. He said, and the reason I'll meet him is because I played a part in his problems, hopefully I can play a part in his solution. And that's a morally courageous man and decent man, because if you think about it, he didn't have to. He didn't have to face up to something that he'd been a part of and face up to somebody that he's helped to create in such a horrific fashion. But he was just doing his job, and the families couldn't get their head around that. And as much as I was in a meeting about 6-8 weeks ago with a load of them, and they were all giving me the evil eye. Oh God, I was getting the side eye off everyone. You know that when you feel the atmosphere is crackling in the air. And I just had to sit and hold on. I said, look, understand this, I did not do it for you. And I did not apologise or accept an apology on your behalf. I said, you've got to understand, you've done plenty of things for yourself over the last 42 years, and none of it involved me. And none of it was done for the benefit of me. But you were happy to do that. But you think you've got the right to then control what I do to save me. I saved me that day when I met Carlos. And I'm here now another 32 years later on. And hopefully it was worth saving. But at the end of the day, you've got to do things for yourself, despite what other people think. And this is where a lot of people get into trouble. They do what other people think is right. Sometimes you have to do what's right for you. And I needed to save myself. I had a lot more living left to do. If I didn't, I wouldn't be here.
I wonder if one of the reasons is that, and you see it in Ukraine now, you've got to dehumanise the enemy. We've got to believe the Russians are the baddies, or otherwise, otherwise everyone dies. It's just horrible. For the military to work, you have to believe that your might is the right might, and that you're the goodies versus the baddies, and to unstitch that, to find the humanity on the other side, makes it far more complicated to fight wars.
Yeah, it does, if you're trying to do that during war. But afterwards, there has to be some sort of reconciliation, there has to be some sort of redemptive process. We have to find a way of being able to stop hating. Unfortunately, people carry grudges forever. And, don't get me wrong, if the right cause was there, I probably could do that as well. But the fact of the matter is, this wasn't that cause. This wasn't that time. I wasn't in a position to want to carry on the fight. I remember, you might be wondering why I'm such a stud muffin and I look so unbelievably handsome. And a lot of that's down to the fact that I had fat stem cell transfer. And if you don't know what fat stem cell transfer is, it's cosmetic surgery. Right? By the look of it, some of you fellas have had it done and it didn't work.
Filler? Is it filler?
What it is they suck the fat out of your ass and then they shove it in your face.
Yes.
Right? So anyway, so I've had that, and I get the chance to meet Carlos in Buenos Aires, and he comes into this very opulent room and there's gold and silver picture frames everywhere, very, very expensive. If they'd have turned their back being a good Welsh boy, there'd have been a thing less, I'll tell you now. But anyway, Carlos is stood in the door and I'm stood in the middle of the room. And I'm only 5'10", but I'm much bigger than Carlos. And Carlos is looking at me and I'm looking at him, and we're doing the eyeball thing and running the whole gamut of information, sort of emotion. Anyway, he took the game away from me and he came over and he caught me by my upper arms and he kissed me on both cheeks. But he didn't know about that bit, and he didn't know about the old stem cell stuff. So he was kissing my ass. The odd thing about Carlos is, I was with him last year in Buenos Aires, and Mar del Plata went down to see his whole family in his house. And we went to the Air Force Museum in Buenos Aires, and it's the memorial room for their Air Force. And there's lots of names there, and he was pointing out all his friends and his guys he joined up with and everything else. And we got around to talking, and he was telling me about how difficult it was for them to get to the Falklands, and that meant that they had to refuel on the way over and everything else. And then he was telling me they couldn't find us, and they were flying around the islands, and one young officer broke formation at the back, popped over a hill, and he said, there they are. They flew in, and they made the attack. And the question I was asked was, how long, because you were obviously running out of fuel, how long before you made that attack were you going to make the decision to head home? And this was stuck in my throat. He said, 20 seconds. 20 seconds. All that took place because of the want of 20 seconds more not being able to find us. And I got to be honest, that did put a lump in my throat. And in my trousers as well, but we won't go into that. But sometimes you just got to accept things go wrong. Fate and destiny. Fate is what happens, destiny's in your own hands if you survive.
I wonder, just finally, I'm about to throw it out to the floor for questions, so have a think. But just quickly before, I know you've been quite critical of our British military, the lack of support for veterans, the lack of kit, and the one thing we seem to be very good at doing is commemorating war. So 2012, there was a new, memorial up in the National Memorial Arboretum. There was a new one down in Portsmouth. I think it's the 255 men silhouetted in the harbour. And I wonder how you feel about those commemorative spaces. Do they speak to you?
No, not particularly.
Who are they there for?
I think they're there for history, really. They're there for people who wanted to be there. I would rather there were no war memorials and we never fought a war, but the reality is we need to have people brave enough to go and help those people who are defenceless against people who want to perpetrate evil.
Where do you go? Do you have an Armistice Day or a Falklands anniversary? Where do you go to recapture those lads who died?
There's a huge sort of 20-ton rock in Cardiff, and it's known as the Rock. And it was brought back, the boys brought it back from the Falklands. They got the Navy to bring it back. The RAF transported it. And they got Big Mikey Amanis, that's his company. He puts in reinforced flooring. And he did all the superstructure for it. And then we had people come in and do the rest and do the carving and all the plaques and everything else on it. So that's where we go.
And is that specifically for the Welsh?
Well, it's for anybody who served in the Falklands.
Okay.
It's the Falklands Memorial, and then there's another one in Wrexham, and the cross there is the exact replica of the cross in the Falklands, which was carved from a quarry about a mile from where I was brought up, in a place called Gelliger. And all the boys go up there. They're going up there now in June,
Right.
Which I won't be attending.
Why not?
Because I just don't.
Right.
What I find is, and this is the sad part about it, you mentioned being in the public eye and how other people take it. Occasionally you come across some of the ex-guys who aren't happy that I was in the public eye and they weren't. And as I say to them, look, I'd quite happily go back in time and set fire to you, and I'll take your role and be completely uninjured. If you're unhappy with the way things have turned out, go back in time, sort it out. There's nothing I could do about that. There's nothing I can do about being the worst injured and the media choosing to follow me. I didn't choose the media.
But I wonder also if beyond all those memorial sites, you are the monument to the Falklands War. For so many of us, the public, when we think of the Falklands War, we don't think of Stanley, we don't think of the National Memorial Arboretum, we think of Simon Weston. We might forget that you're only a CBE, not an OBE. But the truth is, we think of you, and that must catch you.
CBE is more important than OBE. Yeah.
I had Mother Commander. Oh yeah.
I was an OBE in the 1990s.
And then how did you upgrade?
And
what did you do differently?
I opened a letter.
Did you?
Yeah, a little broke.
Well, I'm jealous of you now. I'm not surprised some of them.
I didn't have my wife opened the letter, and then she was absolutely mortified because she'd opened my letter asking me would I accept it. So, yeah, I know she's awful, But yeah.
So the next one is Sir, is it?
That's never going to happen. I've blotted my copybook far too many times, I think. No, you mean, look, this is true. Don't tell anybody, right? It's just between me and you. But somebody said that they'd put me forward, and they phoned up the titles office or whatever they call it, and they were told all the things I'd done and how much I'd raised for charity and all, which is an extreme amount. And they went, yeah, but what else has he done? And I thought, okay. So that's what they told me, and I thought, that just about sums up. Somebody said told me that they tried to get me on Who Do You Think You Are?
Yeah.
And they had this young female researcher on there, and she went, yeah, but he's not famous enough. What has he done? And I thought, okay. I stacked my career and everything that I've done up against Mother Teresa without a doubt.
No, you've done a lot. And I was reading your old book, which is how I got stuck in the wrong order of merit.
Yeah.
Okay. I would like to ask, has anybody got any further questions for the mighty Simon Weston? Please, I'm going to come and, well, I come and hand around the microphone that's now working. I'll come and find you. I'm heading here, is that right? You look willing. Oh, no, okay, that's a bit disappointing, okay. Oh, there we are, someone's not getting right.
Simon, can I just ask, what charities do you work with at the moment?
The main charity that I work with at the moment is called Deborah. And we started down this part of the world, I believe. It was started in the 60s, again, as I believe. I'm president of it, the honorary president. And it deals with a terrible skin condition called epidermolysis bullosa, or EB as we know it, which is the EB in Deborah. But it was also the name of the young girl whose mother couldn't get any help at all for this condition. And it's the worst condition that you've never heard of. And most of these children don't grow to puberty, but if they do, most of them don't live past 35. But they spend their whole life living in agony because they can't heal. The skin won't heal, and it blisters. And yeah, it's awful. But we're making massive strides forward now, primarily because the chief exec is a guy called Tony Byrne, and Tony has made a massive difference. He has changed the direction in which we've gone, and he's been the main driver to help us create so much. But we've had trials on drugs and repurposing drugs, which is what we need to do, because it costs us about £500,000 to repurpose a drug, or it would cost like £1 billion to create a drug. So repurposing them is by far and away the most effective way, and it's quicker. And we're fortunate we've got people like Graham Souness, who's absolutely dedicated, Frank Warren, even Tyson Fury's been involved, and you'd be surprised just how generous he can be. So there's a lot of good people and a lot of other vice presidents that we've got that are making a huge difference. The only reason I'm relevant to it is because I spent over 7 years without skin on parts of my body, and I understand the pain. The only difference is there's always a light at the end of my tunnel. For these souls, there isn't. But they're stoic as hell, and some of them are feisty as anything, but they're great. I think the world of them. In fact, they've got the families weekend this weekend, which I can't attend, because quite literally I've been on the road for a whole month, and this is my last, and that's why I'm staying overnight and driving tomorrow because I'm knackered. But yeah, so that's my main charity. There are other little bits and pieces I'm involved in, but that's the main thing that I'm doing. I don't do military anymore because it doesn't need me. There are so many great people out there, men and women, who are doing a phenomenal job. But when I came involved in it, there wasn't, and it needed that change, and it needed a new face to help drive it on, and to bring it back to the general public understanding again. You know, because people had lost contact with what it was that we were raising funds for all the time. And I was a very, as we just said, I'm a very visible character. So I became the face of the Falklands, and I became the face of military charity as well.
So I'm going to rein you in a bit there, just because I know the last orders at the bar are 8:30.
Okay.
So any questions, we've got to get in under the wire.
That's me told, isn't it?
Hi, Simon. It's easier telling you from a distance, less intimidating.
Just wanted to know how your PTSD was treated, and whether you think it's a permanent treatment and it's solved it all.
I didn't have my PTSD treated. They didn't have any treatment for it back then. And it was meeting Carlos, which eradicated my nightmares. It completely got rid of it. I've never had a bout of PTSD since. You know, I don't fear anything really. I fear going on high places with my wife, because we did a television program about 2 years ago, and we went in a cherry picker together, and we were strapped together, and there's a bungee jump, and she shoved me off 140 foot. Because I wasn't letting go, my fingerprints are still on the bloody cherry picker, but she shoved me off. And the reason being, she'd already picked out the new car with the new colour. Honest to God, I'm heavily insured, Jesus.
Now we're coming to a lad at the back. Well, I know, I thought that was a compliment.
Simon, just a quick one. I used to follow you around BBC Broadcasting House in the late 80s. I used to work there and follow it. It was either you or Terry Wogan I used to see every day. Literally. So I'd just like to say thank you for all the words you've said tonight, because that, for me, at my moment in life now, means an awful lot. You have to love yourself and what you're doing at that time. Divorce and all that type of stuff.
Cheers.
Thank you very much for that. But on the other side of it, thank you for what you guys done at your time in your life for doing what we stand for today. That means such a lot to the likes of me, and I call you as well. So thank you very much.
Cheers, guys. Thanks. Thank you very much.
And a final question? Or are we going to end on that new masculine tiffle moment?
Go. I tell you what'll happen now is we'll stop, we'll go to the bar, and I'll get 1,000 questions. I didn't want to ask. You're depriving all the other people of hearing the answer.
Hi Simon, I just want to know, if you hadn't joined the Navy, what would you be doing now? Would you still be nicking cars?
Well, considering I joined the army,
I thought he was on a ship, sorry.
yeah, no, it's an easy mistake to make, you know. You don't see too many sailors in a red jacket and a big black hat, unless they're wearing stiletto or slingback boots. But that's another story altogether. But no, you mean, do you know, genuinely, I don't think I'd be as proud of myself as I am if I hadn't gone in the army. Being injured, look, it could have been avoided, it wasn't. I can't deal with what ifs, I can only deal with what is. And there's so much living left to do. There's so many things left to do. I have no desire to retire, that's my mantra. All I want to do is carry on working, carry on being relevant, carry on being busy, carry on being excited by different things and projects and opportunities, and yeah, you know, just making a difference in life. And even if it's a small difference, it's got to be worth doing. And I think everybody can do that, you know, and we all play a part, and lots of people have done lots of different things and don't get any accolades for it. But you know, the fact is, just know that if you've made a difference, somebody else somewhere will reap the rewards and the benefits of that. So that's what it is for me. That's all it is for me.
Thank you. I'm coming back, I'm warning you now, I'm re-landing. On that idea of sacrifice, I think you obviously didn't make the ultimate sacrifice, but blooming nearly. And what's going on in Ukraine at the moment, and we talk about cost of living, and it's really important, isn't it, that we shoulder a bit of their pain and step up a bit, because there's a lot of boys out in the east of Europe dying at the moment, and women.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I mean, they didn't pick the fight. The fight was picked for them, as it was for us, as it is for most people that defend against the might of wrongdoing. And if we could, then we should, you know. And I know we go on about the cost of living here, but let's be honest about it. The UN isn't here, the UNHCR isn't here. We're not getting aid flights coming over Britain and pouring stuff out of the back of them so that we got to wait for parachutes to come down. So it is tough, and I'm not belittling how hard it is for people in this country. But when you look at it and take it in its entirety and compare, and it's not very fair at times to compare, but we've got it tough. But let's be fair, some people have got it an awful lot tougher, not just here, but you know, even in the Middle East, you know, whatever your standpoint is on that, the innocent are the innocent on all sides. And and soldiers understand this more than most. You know, we need to do as much as we can if we can, even if it's only collecting teddy bears, you know, to try and just make a little bit of a difference. Because, you know, there's a lot of kids. There's a lot of people feeling very lonely, and a lot of soldiers, men and women, you know, in Ukraine, that are suffering, and Lord only knows what the injury count is going to be, because we never see that. We never ever see how many injured, and the terrible injuries, because there's an awful lot of artillery, and you know, anybody that's been in the military knows artillery is awful. When that comes down, landmines, artillery, air strikes, it's horrendous.
And on that slightly depressing note, you've now got 1 minute 30 to have a final drink. So,
Yeah.
And in the meantime, a massive round of applause, please, for Simon Weston CBE. CBE.
Thank you very long, guys. Thank you. I'm not miserable, honest. I'm not miserable. Cheers.